The 1960s Corvair, condemned by Ralph Nader as unsafe at any speed. 10 years later, one of the agencies finally got around to testing the Corvair, and they concluded, and I quote, the 1960-63 Corvair compared favorably with the other contemporary vehicles used in the tests.
But the big government steamroller never stopped. We consumer activists got Congress to create the Consumer Product Safety Commission.
Consumer product safety?
They really do use highly skilled people to devise regulations that will prevent toy guns from making too big a bang.
Long before I woke up to the truth, Friedman understood that such rules do little good.
The commission, in effect, is deciding what they think is good for us. They are taking away our freedom to choose.
And drowning us in piles of regulations.
In 1936, the federal government established the Federal Register to record all of the regulations, hearings, and other matters connected with the agencies in Washington. This is Volume 1, Number 1. In 1936, it took 3 volumes like this to record all these matters. In 1937, it took 4. And then it grew and grew and grew. Then around 1970 came a veritable explosion, so that one pile is no longer enough to hold the regulations for that year. It takes 2 and then 3 piles. Until on one day in 1977, September 28th, the Federal Register had no fewer than 1,754 pages. And these aren't exactly what you would call small pages either.
And now it's 30 years later. This is what we get every year, about 70,000 pages just last year. These are all rules we just have to obey. Today, the think tank that is most effective and active, I think, in fighting against this is the Cato Institute, and its executive vice president is David Boaz, who joins us now. So, David, looking at that, you're not doing a very good job. You're losing.
Think how much worse it could be.
Well, that's a good point. At least now there is something new. We're having a debate about the size of government.
We are having a debate, and that's one of the things that happens every time somebody comes into the presidency and really says, I want to make the government a lot bigger. Sometimes it happens, but it does revive the American spirit of individualism and anti-government sentiment, concern that the government is too big. And we're having that debate now. And obviously in 2008, you might say the big government side won. It looks like possibly the big government side is not going to do that well this year, because people have started to notice that government spending is getting out of control. Government has taken over health care, and they're not happy about that.
Well, another example of how Friedman was well ahead of his time, he saw what was happening in many government schools.
The teachers who teach here don't like this kind of situation. The students don't like to come here to go to school. Nobody is happy with this kind of education. The taxpayers surely aren't. The experts mean well, but the centralization produces deadening uniformity. It destroys the experimentation that is a fundamental source of progress.
He offered a solution.
I have long believed that children, teachers, all of us, would benefit from a voucher system.
A voucher system where the money's attached to the students so parents can pick a school and schools have to compete. Friedman, again, way ahead of his time. Free to Choose interviewed a British headmaster who sounds just like a union teacher today.
We see this as a barrier between us and the parent. We make our judgment because we believe it's in the best interest of every Willie and every little Johnny that we've got. It's this sort of philosophy of the marketplace that we object to. I'm not sure that parents know what is best educationally for their children.
And the Brits beat back vouchers then, just as American educrats are beating them back now. Another battle freedom hasn't won.
There's more school choice than there was when Milton Friedman was writing about it. We've got charter schools, we've got more homeschooling, we do have some small voucher programs, but it's true, the power of the teachers' unions and the education establishment and the people who have a stake in the current system is extremely strong.
We have a volunteer army now. At the time, the draft was just accepted. He change that?
That's right. When I was young and when Milton Friedman was middle-aged, there was conscription. Every young man knew that you would get drafted into the Army and possibly sent to Vietnam. And Milton Friedman changed that through his writings, through conferences that he organized, through serving on a presidential commission on the all-volunteer force. He really was the intellectual father of moving us to the volunteer Army. And every young man who's been born since about 1960 in a way, owes his life to Milton Friedman.
At that presidential commission, he debated General Westmoreland, Friedman writes in his memoir, Westmoreland said he did not want to command an army of mercenaries. I stopped him and said, General, would you rather command an army of slaves? He drew himself up and said, I don't like to hear our patriotic draftees viewed as slaves. I replied, I don't like to hear our patriotic volunteers referred to as mercenaries. And if they're mercenaries, then I, sir, am a mercenary professor, and you, sir, are a mercenary general, and we're served by mercenary physicians, get our meat from a mercenary butcher. That was the last we heard from the general about mercenaries.
Mercenary means that somebody offers you money to get you to do something. The alternative is that somebody orders you to do it. They don't have any mercenaries in North Korea. They don't have any mercenaries in the old Soviet Union. Everybody did what he was told to, and that was the way it was with the draft before Milton Friedman managed to change it. So I'd a lot rather live in a country where people make their decisions because people offer them money to persuade them than where they're issued orders at the point of a gun.
Finally, Milton Friedman won his Nobel Prize for his work on inflation. We have a silly clip from Free to Choose that begins to address that.
Everybody seemed happy at first. But by the early 70s, as the good times rolled along, prices started to rise more and more rapidly. Soon, some of these people were going to lose their jobs. We have got it. The party was coming to an end.
So, David, what did he teach us about inflation?
He taught us that when the government, the Federal Reserve, creates more dollars, each one of them will be worth less. That's the simple point that it took a long time for economists to figure out. And when that happens, everybody's dollars are worth less. Your savings are worth less. Your salary won't buy as much, and therefore you want to get a higher salary. People raise their prices. You get a spiraling of inflation, and it can really undermine societies, and it absolutely undermined the American economy in the late 1970s.
And it was that work that won him the Nobel Prize?
That's right, his work on the science of economics, particularly on money and inflation.
And I should say that the Cato Institute, where you work now, has a Milton Friedman Prize.
Well, that's right. He won the Nobel Prize for his contributions to economics, but we thought there ought to be a Nobel Prize for freedom, because freedom is at least as important as economics and chemistry and physics and literature and all the things they give Nobel Prizes for. And in fact, freedom is the precondition for progress in most of those areas. So we said there ought to be a Nobel Prize for freedom. Since there's not one, we're going to create it, and we're going to call it the Milton Friedman Prize for Advancing Liberty.
And you give out $500,000 every 2 years for that. Well, thank you, David Boaz.